This program is brought to you by Digital Laundry and the Fresh Bread Group. Coming up, a new Eharlem TV program, Harlem Speaks, a series of conversations examining issues impacting community residents. Our guest today on Eharlem Speaks is Angleo Falcon, the president of the National Institute of Latino Policy. He's a political scientist, born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, but came to the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn before his age of 1, went to Williamsburg Public Schools, Brooklyn Tech man.
Yes.
As well as did his undergraduate work at Columbia University in political science, and his postgraduate work at the State University of New York at Albany, where he graduated from. And Angelo, welcome to Eharlem Speaks. Nice to see you again.
Nice to be here. I live in Williamsburg, so it's a long ride to come all the way up here to East Harlem. But I'm glad I made it.
Well, I'm glad you got here. Now, the next question is, why political science?
Well, to me, when I went to college, Columbia this was 1969. It was a time when the place was up in turmoil. Students were taking over the buildings around the Vietnam War, other issues. I had just graduated from Brooklyn Tech, which is a very non-political place, very technical. But I was involved in ASPIDA. And in ASPIDA, I got a certain consciousness about giving back to the community and getting involved in social change, and got all those kinds of things put in my head.
Well, ASPIDA was the organization that filed a suit that guaranteed ultimately bilingual education in this town.
Right. And at that time, you had people like Antonia Pantoja. My counselor was Tati, who was wound up being eventually the president of Oslo's Community College. And it was the first time I saw any kind of Puerto Rican role models, professionals. Because when I grew up in Williamsburg, they were all like Jewish professionals, everything except Puerto Ricans. I'm the son of a bodeguero, and we were, I guess, the highest in the totem pole in the Puerto Rican community. And so, my mother's aspiration for me was, hope you get a job as a clerk at the local bank. And I was a white collar job. And in high school, even in high school, but elementary school, it was always really difficult as a Puerto Rican to kind of, aspire to anything, because people would constantly had these stereotypes about you, even if you were a good student. For example,
a scientist, Angelo?
Well,
a scientist?
Well, the thing is, to get into Brooklyn Tech, for example, what was interesting was I went to PS 17. And when I told the principal I'm interested in taking the test for Brooklyn Tech, he told me, no, we're not going to let you do it, because we never had anybody get into these specialized schools. So even at that age, I had to organize. We got like 5 of us to take the test, but we had to organize to take a test. And what happened was that I was the only one who got in. But it was like, geez, what's this guy? This principal is not very, motivational.
And this is all happening you're 13, 14 years of age.
Yeah, and in Williamsburg, right? And I always found it ironic, because I used to live on a little street called Hope Street. So then in terms of, Brooklyn Tech, ASPIDA opened the doors for some of us to be able to apply to Columbia, because there was all this turmoil and there was a whole push by the students to open up the university. And when I went to my guidance counselor at Brooklyn Tech, she told me, no way, no way you're gonna, get in. And I said, well, the heck with it. And I went with the ASPIDA people, and I got into Columbia. The process was transparent in both cases, because there was push from the community to open up these institutions. That's how I got in. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten in. I was a good student. I wasn't the most brilliant guy in the world, but it was, I was I was a good student, and so that stuff politicized me. I got to see how the process works. I saw how our community can make a difference. So when I went to Columbia, it was a very political environment. And so to look at politics was something that to me was very important.
It was the 60s. It was Vietnam War. It was the beginning of the women's movement. Students for a Democratic Society on campus. I mean,
Yep.
you had it all going on.
Well, we organized at Columbia to try to open it up as well to more poor Latino students. And so, it's a constant process of organizing, and then, of course, political science made sense to me.
And political science in terms of the Latino community specifically, why so?
Well, my formation has been around the issue of the Latino community, Puerto Rican community, Latino community, and the empowerment of that community as a way of basically opening up and democratizing American society. And that's simply a question of getting our piece of the pie, but rather it was an area where we needed a lot of help as a community to kind of deal with these kinds of important issues and how our community fits into American society. So I found it intellectually interesting. I also found it interesting from the point of view that people in power, all my white professors, were always discouraging me from doing this. When I was in graduate school, I did a lot of research on Puerto Rican Latino politics, and my professors would say, well, listen, what are you going to do with this stuff? This is not marketable. And I tell them, well, mind your own business. That's my business. I'm not, I really am not interested,
And this is despite the size of the Latino community in New York at the time?
Sure. This is up in Albany, where a lot of these guys didn't even know what a Latino was. But my thing, I did some research. I saw also that the research I did as a graduate student was also kind of groundbreaking. It was things no one had done. I did one study of the difference in political participation by Puerto Ricans in New York compared to Puerto Rico. As you know, in Puerto Rico,
aquí y allá.
Well, that's another study I did later. But this one was really looking at that issue and trying to grapple with, what happens to Puerto Ricans. They vote high numbers on the island. What happens when they get here? Do the airlines put something in the water, or what the heck's going on? So did a whole kind of structural analysis, and
well,
no one had done that before.
Issue fascinated me because I, as a journalist, would be asking the same thing.
Sure.
I'd be on the island with my family, and people are voting. Over 90% of the population is voting in every election. All of a sudden, they come to New York, particularly after 1956, the biggest migration of Puerto Ricans, and you wonder what happened to the vote.
Yeah, no, it's see, it was things that to me, being in the Puerto Rican community, were obvious questions to be looked at, but nobody was looking at them. And certainly the kind of mainstream political scientists were not looking at that. We still were at that time looking at race relations in terms of black and white. And the idea of looking at Latinos, Asians, other minority groups was something that was really not in vogue at the time. And so what I loved...
Well, a lot of people thought, Angelo, that the Latinos, the Puerto Ricans were hanging on to the coattails of the black community.
Or were the new European immigrants, because there was a strong notion that we were going to assimilate. I mean, Nathan Glazer and Moynihan wrote that book, Beyond the Melting Pot, and they basically said, look, Puerto Ricans are different from blacks because they're more like the immigrant of the past. They're individually oriented. They don't blame the society for racism, unlike blacks. And of course, their analysis was off. But basically, a lot of the work I did back then was to try to look at, examine those kinds of issues. I did one of the first, well, not one of the first, but I did a big study on Latino leadership, in Puerto Rican leadership, in particular in New York, exploring that, So there were a bunch of things that I got involved with, which were kind of, I thought were really interesting. A lot of my professors didn't know what the hell I was talking about, but I said the heck with it. So when I came from SUNY Albany, I had finished everything, all but dissertation. I came back to New York to try to write my dissertation. Of course, I never did it. So I don't have a doctorate. I have everything else.
I was going to call you Dr. Angelo, but
well, I get called doctor all the time. I don't know, because maybe I look like a doofus or something. I don't know if people call me that. But what was interesting was when I came back, what I wound up doing was starting something called the Institute for Puerto Rican Policy. That was my dissertation, and that was in 1982. We started working with that, and we wanted to, we started noticing that the research in New York, whether it was the Center for Puerto Rican Studies or it was the Hispanic Research Center up at Fordham University, was just not clicking. The stuff at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies at that time was too radical. It was all this Marxist stuff.
Father Fitzpatrick up there?
Yeah, well, up at Fordham, but the problem with the one up, so you have the Centro, which was very Marxist Leninist, and most of our folks didn't know what the hell they were doing there. In terms of what they were writing, it was interesting stuff, but it wasn't clicking with the community at a certain point. And then you had the stuff up at the Fordham University, which was involved with very professional mental health kinds of issues. So we said, we'd like to see if we could experiment and try to create a way of doing research that really had a direct public policy application that, you know, activists could use.
Yeah, but the way I saw it as a journalist when I started working with you on that kind of information was the research, but the analysis was the really payoff, from my point of view, which using the same information that other people were using, you came up with a different analysis.
Oh, yeah. That was one of the things, because we were always very small. When we started out, there were a couple of things that we were trying to deal with. One was to try to provide some sort of analysis at the kind of state and local level. That wasn't happening. But we never had the resource. I mean, when we started the Institute, that's when Ronald Reagan came into office. So we had no expectations that there was going to be all this money, you know, we're going to develop anything large. Then the other thing was that we were really concerned with what was happening with Puerto Rican elected officials and leadership. We found that a lot of them were really, as far as we were concerned, were selling out the community. They weren't providing leadership. Nobody was holding them accountable, because the minute, you know, anybody said anything against anybody, they'd take the Puerto Rican flag and wrap themselves around it. All of a sudden, they were immune to any kind of, you know, criticism, because they would point to the man, you know, the governor or somebody else.
Several of those people wound up indicted and in jail.
Oh, yeah. So what we did, which I thought was a major innovation in the history of the Latino community here, was that we started taking them on. We started being critical, and that was, oh, forget it. I mean, we created a major furor. We would take on people like Angelo del Toro and others, and as well as the governor, or, you know, Governor Cuomo, the last Governor Cuomo, or Ed Koch. But we would take these guys on, and we became very popular in the community, but very unpopular in political circles. So it got so bad that at one point I was telling people, like, you know, when I was asked, well, you know, how do you know you're doing a good job? I go, when I walk into a room with Puerto Rican politicians and they all spit at me, I know, hey, we're doing a great job, man. We're getting them pissed off.
Please visit us on the web at eharlemtv.com, where you could tell us what you think about our program, as well as access any of our stories. Angelo, what was really going on at the Institute for Puerto Rican Policy was basically arming people with, empowering people with information.
That's the idea. I mean, people say, you know, knowledge is power. So we said, yeah, okay, but, you know, it depends on how you package that knowledge. It depends on how you focus it. And we found that it was possible with very little resources to take stuff that's already out there and kind of focus it in a way that it made certain of these issues relevant to the community. One of the first issues we took on was the issue of the underrepresentation of Latinos in state government jobs. Now, I didn't think it was like the most important issue in the world or anything like that, but we were experimenting. Look, I told people straight up, I never did this before. I'm not exactly sure what the hell I'm doing, but we're going to try something a little different, you know, based on a critique of what existed.
You started doing the count of the folks in the administration.
Right, we did that, and the thing was, you know, when Ronald Reagan came in, as you may recall, there was this movement of the evolution of the national role to the states.
Mm-hmm. The federalism.
Yeah.
That so is popular today.
So we were at the time saying, well, you know, Latinos should be on top of that. Puerto Ricans and Latinos should be on top of this in New York. So we started looking at that issue of, well, how well are we represented in state government as something that was quantifiable and something that we heard people complaining about all the time, but nobody had put numbers to it. We found that Latinos were unbelievably unrepresented at the state level. I mean, we were less than 3% of the state government workforce, and we were like, you know, like, I don't know, it was like at that time maybe 10% of the state population. Mm-hmm. And we made a big deal out of that, you know, and we also started looking into the appointments when Mario Cuomo came in. At that time, we did this thing looking at the appointments. They wouldn't give us, they said, we don't have data on the political appointments. So we said, okay, we're going to have to be innovative. So I said to myself, well, listen, every time they put out a political appointment, they put out a press release. They're taking credit. So I said, let me get all the press releases and do an analysis of all the announced things. Well, it turns out, you know, we found that it was like maybe like 4% of the appointees, after a pressure from the community, were Latino. And so they told us that we were wrong. And we asked them, you know, well, produce the numbers. And at one point, you know, they kept saying that they didn't have those numbers. And I remember there was a big incident where I basically said, look, Mario Cuomo's a liar. He's lying to us. Well, at the time, what was interesting, and this is where I saw the role of the media.
And Mario Cuomo did not take that lightly,
No,
if I
no, not
remember
at all.
correctly.
Not at all. And what happened was, which was interesting, was that there was this guy, interesting guy, who was the editor of El Diario at the time, Manuel de Dios. And Manuel de Dios is a very aggressive, Cubano, a very aggressive journalist. I mean, his style was, I mean, he went after drug dealers. He was very, so what he did is he put the front page had a picture of me, a big picture of me facing Mario Cuomo, calling him a liar. ¿Para qué fue eso? It was unbelievable, the reaction. What I found, I started getting phone calls from different editors from the Daily News and different places saying that Andrew Cuomo was calling them and telling them I had a criminal record. They shouldn't listen to me because I had a criminal record. I'm like, what the heck's this guy talking about? Then, I lived in Williamsburg, and then my father, who also lives in Williamsburg, his name is Angleo Falcon, which is really my name. All of a sudden, he's in jail. And I'm like, what the heck? Now, my father, as I mentioned before, is a bodeguero. And at that time, if you were a bodeguero, you were also a bolitero. It was the same, business. That's how
The
you kept.
bolita was the number in those
Yeah, and
days.
that's how you kept the business going.
And you gave credit as
So
well.
then what happened was they got us mixed up. They thought they probably did a search before Google and stuff, and they figured he was me. And he wound up in jail.
Political targeting.
Yeah, there were consequences, and what that taught me was one, that there were consequences to doing this kind of work, and secondly that the role of the media is really important in getting the message to the community, and that a lot of the stuff that we did involved not just research, but also a certain level of theatrics. And that is what we did was we played the stuff out for our community in the media. They saw that you could be critical of those in power, and you're not going to die.
We're taking an old firehouse that served this community for 120 years and now transforming it to another use, but again, for the community, for the future of the community.
There's a buzz in East Harlem. For the last 2 years, it's been all bricks and mortar on 104th Street as Manhattan Neighborhood Network, Manhattan's public access station, nears completion of a new media center.
It's a fabulous new renovation project, and now we're just doing the final leg of this long journey, which is going to put in the broadcast equipment, the actual cameras, and all the television equipment that's going to come in that has to be done now that we have a completed facility.
Dan Coughlin, Executive Director of Manhattan Neighborhood Network, is on a mission to develop the next generation of East Harlem storytellers.
Video now is a way that people are communicating all over the world. So that makes it more important than ever that we all have access to that means of video production. That communities, especially communities that have not always had access to this kind of resource, are getting their foot in the door. We are dealing with an old building, a building from the 1880s, gorgeous facility, but we wanted to work very closely with the Landmarks Commission and the Department of Buildings to make sure we were doing it right.
Getting a firehouse adaptively reused and preserved on 104th Street is a major event.
Robert Tierney is chairman of New York City's Landmarks Preservation Commission.
And a sign of resurgence and development, it's a sign of jobs, and we like this kind of construction particularly because it's adaptively reused, it's preserving the best of the city's architecture and history, and the more of that, the better.
Chris Bell, East Harlem historian.
It's always important to retain any building that was built in the 19th century. So if it was built in 1883, and you talk about over 3 centuries. So that's why it's very significant retaining any building in East Harlem built from that time.
We want to teach people, we want to welcome people in, and we want to give them the skill set that they can then use this facility on an active and ongoing basis. You walk in, beautiful reception area, and also on the first floor is our main studio that holds 74 people. Second floor, very traditional public access. You have editing facilities. We also have a teaching space, a third floor youth media center. So important for the young people of today to have computer skills, technology skills, media skills. Fourth floor, the old hayloft is turned into office space, production space where people can do editing or work on their various programs. The cellar is what we have, the great green room is down there, and everybody in television knows the green room where guests stay.
Isabel Castellanos is director of Manhattan Neighborhood Network's Youth Channel. She'll be preparing the 12 to 25-year-olds for the competitive world of television and new media.
We are teaching students, we're teaching youth, teaching young adults, teaching teenagers how to create TV shows and videos for the internet, sort of any kind of media that they're interested in making. So we're really trying to create this awareness around all this media that's being produced by young people.
For Manhattan Neighborhood Network and the residents of East Harlem, the year 2012 will be a year of transformation and new opportunities.
A free, independent media is the oxygen of democracy. Our mission is really a mission about building a community through media, and that's what this firehouse will do.
For Eharlem TV, I'm Fred Noriega. For more information, please visit the Manhattan Neighborhood Network's website at www.mnn.org/firehouse.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, it's go time!
Coming up on Eharlem TV, the 38th annual Harlem Skyscraper Classic. Join us as we bring you coverage of a full day of fun and excitement around Marcus Garvey Park. From kids on training wheels all the way to the pros.
Because it's a jewel, it's a beautiful thing, and we need to ensure that it keeps going for another 40 years.
That's next time on Eharlem TV.
You were not only, doing research and analysis, but you were also doing advocacy.
Yeah.
Essentially, and coalition building, or trying to build coalitions amongst people. Now, somewhere around 2006, 2007, let me kind of swing this into the census perspective. You were appointed to the steering committee for the 2010 census. Why was that important?
Well, in the work that we did, I noticed there were always complaints. We were involved with the 1980 census, 1990 census. Complaints in the community, and not just in New York, just across the country, was, oh my God, these people are making all these decisions that affect us, like on the race and Hispanic questions and other things, and we're not consulted. We're always involved in these things very late in the game. Now, the census begins planning for example, the 2020 census, they're already begun planning. Our community used to get involved like a year before the census took place. So I started saying, there's got to be a way of changing this. So back in 2007, what we did is we created something called the Latino Census Network. And this is using the internet. What we did is we said, listen, let's start that process a little earlier this time. I wish we would have done it sooner, but for the 2010 census, let's start getting our people organized earlier. So we started basically getting information on this and getting the word out about the census, so around the country. Jose Serrano, our congressman from the Bronx, reached out to me and told me, hey, do you want to be on this Census Advisory Committee on the Hispanic population, because he knew of the work I was doing.
Basically giving you a seat at the table.
He did, and it wasn't that easy because, it's very political. Some of these appointments can be very political, and I'm not I'm not a constituent of his, but I think he respected the work we did and asked me to do that. I said, sure, and I wound up on this Census Advisory Committee on the census, which it wasn't a paid position, it's voluntary, but it put us in a position where we had direct access to the hierarchy at the Census Bureau and could have some sort of input. By the way, on the committee, which had 9 people, I was the only Puerto Rican. The rest were Mexican Americans, and there was a Salvadorian woman. So I got involved that way, and then we also were part since 2000 of the census and another program, and that is the Institute was part of this program called the Census Information Centers Program, which consisted of over 57 community-based organizations, universities, and others in communities of color primarily that were charged with, getting we get census data for free, and our job was to get it out to the community, use it for analysis. And so I was involved with that, and today I'm the chair of the Census Advisory Committee on the Hispanic population. I'm also chair of the steering committee of the Census Information Center program. That gives me access to a lot of inside information.
Okay, now, why is the census so important?
Well, the census is, first of all, critical in terms of resources. We're talking about a federal budget with about $400 billion are needs-based in some way, different ways, and the census is the mechanism that's used to figure out how to distribute this money.
Do we pay enough attention to it?
No, I don't. I think the 2010 census, we really did a tremendous mobilization in the community. But my challenge now is how do we get the community to pay attention to it between the census? In other words, now as they're doing the planning for the 2020, how do we get the community involved with the planning and not wait till the last minute, or not even like we did this past 3 years before? So we've done things like I convened the meeting of national Latino organizations with the census director to try to address all sorts of issues. For example, they're going to be they've been doing research on maybe reconfiguring the race and Hispanic question. We would need to be a part of that discussion early on. I don't want to wait till the last minute. So there are things like that that we're getting involved with. There are also different players that get involved. I'm talking about the community, but also, for example, Univision and Telemundo got involved, very involved, because for them, it's a way of make the case that advertisers should be putting more money into their stations to make so that the corporate America, Latino corporate America, has a lot at stake in terms of these numbers. So it's not simply community stuff. And I remind people the Census Bureau is part of the Department of Commerce for a reason. It's not part of the Department of Health and education. So there are different sectors in the community that have different interests in the census. But overall, if you look at the press today, you see how important it is in projecting the community in American society and developing a conversation about the role of Latinos in American society.
What I'd like to do is to invite you back for another half hour, because there's 1,000 questions I'd like you to share with our audience relative to reapportionment, redistricting, the politics of change. Angleo Falcon, thanks for joining us on Eharlem Speaks.
My pleasure.
This program is brought to you by Digital Laundry and the Fresh Bread Group.